Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Military Monday show. We air our Military Monday show the first Monday of every month on Big Blend Radio. And, of course, we're your hosts, Nancy Reed and Lisa Smith, the mother-daughter travel team on the Love Your Parks tour, and also publishers of Big Blend Radio and TV magazine, as well as Parks and Travel magazine. And on today's show, we're very excited to welcome back Mike Guardia. He's one of our Big Blend experts, really always teaching us about military history. And you could ask him anything, and he'll answer it. He knows it. Mike is a military historian. He's a U.S. Army veteran and an award-winning author of numerous books. I mean, he's got his own bookshelf. Seriously. But today we're going to be talking about Hal-Moore, and he's written 3 books focusing on Hal-Moore. The first one, Hal-Moore, A Soldier Once and Always. The second is Hal-Moore, Hal-Moore, A Life in Pictures. And also, he is really part of Hal-Moore and Hal-Moore's leadership. This is an important book. It's called Hal-Moore on Leadership, Winning When Outgunned and Outnumbered, an excellent book. So I encourage you to keep up with Mike on his website, MikeGuardia.com. Also, go to Amazon for his books as well. So welcome back, Military Mike. How are you?
Hey, ladies. I'm doing great, and it's always a pleasure to be on the show.
Hey, it's good to have you back. Didn't we first meet you through Hal-Moore, like one of your Hal-Moore books? Was it his bio? I'm thinking it was one of the first times that you were on our show. It was quite a few years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was. Either the Hal-Moore book or the Don Blackburn one.
Yeah. Oh, I think it could be the Don Blackburn. Yeah, it was. Well, we've been talking for quite a while, and
long
Hal-Moore.
Time now.
I know. Hal-Moore, you've written 3 books, and Hal-Moore himself was an author, right?
He sure was.
Yeah, that's really cool. And one thing I want to touch on is you sent Nancy and I, as we travel the country documenting parks and public lands, we're also getting stories of the different communities. And you sent us on a mission to go and document generals, especially the generals you've written about. And Hal-Moore is definitely one. I know you talked on the show once about Hal-Moore in Yosemite National Park because he loves the outdoors. But while we were in Bardstown, Kentucky, central Kentucky, in the summer of 2019, we were driving around. It was pouring rain, and we were out with our friend Stephanie, and we were on the Lieutenant Hal-Moore Parkway. He has his own street, and Nancy's like, "It's Hal-Moore," and I'm like, "Oh yeah." Mike had given me the list of where Hal-Moore's been, and Bardstown turns out to be where he grew up. And lo and behold, we went to the museum. We saw Hal-Moore's house. We drove on his parkway and went to his museum. It's a military history museum, and it is on what's Museum Row in Bardstown, right in there. It's a beautiful museum that really covers all the different world wars, the civil wars. Really, they cover. I mean, it's a smallish museum, but they really cover a lot of history, and they have a wonderful section dedicated to Hal-Moore. And it was so cool. Mike's book, your books were there. It was awesome. Have you been there?
I have.
Cool. Okay. Wow,
I have been there twice, as a matter of fact.
Oh, very cool. And it is a cool. You know what I mean about how they cover all those different wars. It's like yeah.
Mike, I just want you to know we stood in front of your books and we're like, hey, we know him.
Yeah. And hey, Mike's name is in the exhibits too, as we're talking about the leadership book, and that was something I thought was really cool, getting part of that history of Hal-Moore. What led you to first write about Hal-Moore? Can you remember when you first found out about him?
Absolutely. So if we were to wind the clocks back to March 1st of 2002, that was opening night for the film We Were Soldiers, and I was one of the fortunate ones who got to see it on opening night. And I remember being there in the theater, and I remember watching the film, and all I could think to myself was this film was a game changer for me, because it was the first film that I had ever seen to portray the Vietnam veteran in a positive light. Because up to that point, almost every Vietnam picture that I had seen, they all had one thing in common. They all portrayed the Vietnam veteran as somebody who was malicious, somebody who was mentally unstable, for lack of a better term, someone who was just a misfit in modern society. we all remember the pictures of Lieutenant Dan, and that's pretty much how the Vietnam veteran, I think, was categorized and stereotyped by Hollywood for so long.
Yeah.
But here was a film that had no political agenda, had absolutely no social agenda, and really was just an earnest and intimate portrayal of the men who went overseas and fought for their country, just like they had done in every other war. And I was particularly impressed by how well Mel Gibson had portrayed Hal-Moore in the film, because up to that point, I only had a very passing familiarity with the Battle of Ia Drang, and I had never heard of Hal-Moore himself. But I was just very impressed by how he was portrayed in that film, and how he was able to both lead and inspire his men when the odds were stacked against him in a war that was very quickly becoming unpopular with the American public back home. And after I got out of the movie theater, I was thinking to myself, gosh, right next to Saving Private Ryan, this is my all-time favorite war picture. And from that point on, I wanted to learn as much about the battle as I could, and also as much about Hal-Moore as I possibly could. So in the years following the film's release, I read the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young, which was what the film was based on. And then I also read the sequel to the book called We Are Soldiers Still, which told of Hal-Moore and Joe Galloway's return to the battlefields of Vietnam about 25 years after the battle itself had concluded, and how that return visit helped them bring closure to a lot of the horrors that they were wrestling with at the time. But, as I read both books, I went about looking for a biography on Hal-Moore, and I was quite shocked that no one had yet written one. Because for as popular as Hal-Moore was both in and out of the Army, I was thinking to myself, gosh, for sure somebody has to have written about Hal-Moore's life, or, maybe Hal-Moore's written about it himself. But when I found that there was no extant biography on Moore and what he had accomplished beyond Vietnam, that's when I took up the task to try to write a biography myself.
Cool.
And
cool.
and through that you got to meet him, right?
I sure did. I spent about a week and a half with him at his home in Auburn, Alabama, just interviewing him and going through all of his photos and old letters, and just an incredible amount of stories that he had to tell. It's very easy to lose track of time when talking to somebody like Hal-Moore.
And at that point too, so you write his biography, and you also got to know his family, right? And from there, it was at 2017 that it's like, okay, now let's do, Hal-Moore's, lessons of on leadership, winning when outgunned and outnumbered. And because this is something you can lead, like you're saying, like he's positive, and he had very strong commitment and balance and just integrity. And I love the leadership book. It to me is just something that I wish school kids had it in their hands, for teens and preteens. I think it really shows that you can get what you want, and you can do it in a positive way. But from there,
right.
That was something he started writing. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So let's see. I first got the itch to want to do a book on his leadership principles, I think around 2015. The Hal-Moore bio had been out for about 2 years at this point, and when I was looking back through a lot of the material that I had collected for the biography, I said to myself, well, there's probably enough here to make a book on his leadership principles, which I think would appeal not only to military leaders, but leaders in the business world as well, since I think they're applicable across pretty much any organization that's out there. And I approached the family with the idea, and one of his sons got back to me and said, Mike, I was going through Dad's old hard drive, and I actually found about a 15 or 20,000 word outline of a leadership book that he had in mind. This was one of the things that he wanted to do on his own. But of course, gradually as his health started to decline, I think he just kind of put it on the back burner. So Mike, would you like to flesh out what we have here and have it be something that you give my dad co-author credit for. Cool. And I immediately jumped at the opportunity because, now I not only had the backlog of material that Hal-Moore had given me during the interviews that we had done, but I had a working outline of things that he had put down on paper. And not only that, included in this backup hard drive was not only the outline of the book, but several of the papers that he had delivered for things like leadership conferences, things that he had contributed to publications, a lot of speeches that he gave on the power of positive leadership. And at that point, I knew that we had a gold mine on our hands of something that could benefit any future generation of leaders.
Awesome.
And you talk about business too, and I think
Right.
it's something now. I mean, business is changing. We're going through all kinds of changes, and especially here it is in the world of COVID. Everyone had to make changes, but when you make change, there's ways to do it and still have that integrity and have that good
Right.
leadership. And I think leadership has changed, and so I think it's really poignant to have it out now. But also he was a businessman too, wasn't he? And he ran a ski resort. I mean, so Nancy, we have to go back to Colorado. Actually,
Cool.
we will be there when this airs. We'll actually be in Colorado. But he was big on the outdoors.
It sure was. Yeah, he was. Let's see. He was the president of the Crested Butte Ski Lodge, and he did that for a number of years. And he really was able to. He was really able to leverage the skills that he had learned in the military to effectively run a ski resort, which was recognized as one of the top, if not the top, ski resorts in the state of Colorado.
Cool. One thing, going back, with him in Vietnam, this was something he wanted to serve the country, right? That was something he aspired to do even when he was a kid, right? And he ended up in West Point, and he battled. I mean, he was not like the, walk in and be the A student. He really battled.
Oh, he sure did. He called it an academic trip from hell. And one of the things that I remember him telling me was that I enjoyed history and I enjoyed English, but Mike, I was so dumb when it came to mathematics. I could not understand all of the arcane principles behind calculus and analytical geometry and, high-level algebra. But he said, even if I couldn't understand the formulas and, the higher-level arcane math principles, I told myself at the very least I could memorize the formulas and I could drill myself on them at least enough to get by. And then he told me the story of how he would study in the bathroom after lights out by the dim light of a 30-watt bulb. And he would study until about 1 or 2 in the morning, just trying to apply those principles as best he could. And he was not ashamed to admit that I made it by through the skin of my teeth. He said, at the end of my time at West Point, I was proud to say that I graduated at the top of the bottom 15% of my class.
Wow. But
some brains that's using a different side of your brain. Some of those higher math things, and it's concepts that I think a lot has to do with how it's taught sometimes. Because teachers get into a pattern sometimes of teaching only one way for one kind of student. And sometimes they really need to broaden how they come at a subject because everybody is different. And some of those, like calculus and stuff, it's like, really? You're really going to go there? And other people pick it up right away like, oh, and this is easy. And you're like, really? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not a sign of like your intellect. It's really it's everybody thinks from a different aspect. I remember so many students struggling, like even Algebra 1, people are like, oh, I quit. They're like, I'm so out of here. I think I'll cut class.
Well, I would think that math is really important in battle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just even understanding like geometry, like even aim and targeting, and you know, and when you see, you know, just even like a battlefield and having to just actually plan out and be strategic about a battle,
Mm-hmm.
you have to understand math, right? And velocity and all of that.
Right. Well, where you really see the heavy applications for math is in artillery, because they have to calculate, you know, the long-range trajectories of all these artillery shells that they fire, and you know, they have to factor in things like rotation of the earth and wind resistance.
Wow,
and
cool.
Since in the game of artillery, you're essentially hitting targets that you can't see, there's a whole mathematical procedure of how to aim and how to elevate a gun in order to shoot it and have the target that you want to destroy, that's sometimes several miles away, make an accurate impact so that you don't have to send more artillery shells than what you really have to.
See, there was that film, really old film, what's it, Sergeant York? Can't remember who the guy was that played it. He's a really famous actor, but he would wet
I think it was Gary Cooper.
his rifle. Yeah.
Oh,
He'd wet the rifle. He'd wet his thumb to see the wind direction. And then, see, that, to me, that's algebra. I mean, that's the best my mind can go with it.
Don't give Nancy a gun.
No, I don't want a gun. But, I mean, he used to wet his thumb to see the wind direction, to know how to aim in front of where the bullet would go to get to where it was going to go by the time it needed to hit the target, if I can say it that way. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Great. Well, you know, Mike, one thing I like that you said is that they're also calculating, you know, the rotation of Earth. So there it is, Flat Earth Society. Take that. Sorry.
Oh, wow. Hey, what if you had a flat Earth person in the military and they were in charge? Oh, boy.
They're not going to make it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No,
yeah.
I have a pet peeve of that.
Yes.
I can't stand it.
Yes. In the realm of artillery and in the realm of military aviation, you know, all the mathematical procedures that they do, all of the tactics that they have are all based on the concept of living on a round Earth. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I would have framed that and taken it everywhere.
Love it.
But you know, the thing too, I mean, I know that you're in the tanks when you know in the Army. So do you on the inside of the tank get to see, like, do you have to poke your head out? Like, I'm sorry, I know this is, you know, going on a detour, but in a tank, do you, like, how do you see what's going on? Do you always have to poke your head out, or like, do you have like a little radar thing on the inside? Sorry. Like, how do you know, like,
no.
Sorry. I want to
the
know.
Optics on the tank are very, very good. As a matter of fact, the op are such that you can see pretty much everything that's happening on the outside of the tank without having to pop your head out. Now, what a lot of tank commanders end up doing is they end up using the optics inside of their tank, but they keep the top hatch of the tank open. They have it open in what's called an open protected mode, which means that the hatch is open only about maybe 5 or 6 inches to what they call eyeball defilade, to where you have a hatch that is open about 5 or 6 inches, but the plate of the hatch is flat and horizontal above that 5 or 6 inch gap, so that you can poke your head out to about eyeball defilade and see what's going on just quick enough to get a quick scan of the battle space. But then the top covering of your head is still protected against maybe an incoming mortar round or something else. It gives you that extra added sense of protection while giving you a little bit more flexibility to see the battle space beyond just what your onboard optics are telling you.
Yeah, like sometimes when we drive in weird situations, like I roll the window down. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it, but it's like if I roll the window down, I have a better feel of what's going on. It's just a very weird. Hear. Yeah, it's like you need to have that entire vibe of what's going on. But that's I want to go in a tank. I want to see what it's like. To me, it feels like I always think a tank is like the Earth version of a submarine. That's my take on it. I know that's wrong.
Well,
but Yeah, I mean, but it seems so small. Do you get air conditioning in there? Like, how many people can get in a tank? We should do a show on tanks.
We'll see.
I want to do a show on tanks.
Okay.
Now.
Sure. Well, I'm the guy to talk to.
You are the guy. You are the tank dude. But how many people can get in? And do they? I mean, are you all sweating next to each other or what? Like, it seems hot in there.
Okay. Well, the standard American tank has a crew of 4. That is the M1 Abrams. The 3 of the crewmen are inside the turret. The 4th crewman, the driver, is in the hull of the turret. So he's pretty much separated from the 3 other crewmen who are inside the turret. The 3 crewmen in the turret consist of the tank commander. He's the one who's in charge. He's directing the tank where to go. He can also engage targets with the main gun of the tank. Then you also have the gunner, who is the one who's primarily in control of finding and engaging targets. And then on the opposite side of the turret, you have the loader. And the loader is the one who has access to all of the tank rounds. And based on what target either the tank commander or the gunner identify, the loader will pull out the appropriate round for eliminating that target, and he will put it inside the main gun breech, and he'll arm the gun, which enables either the gunner or the tank commander to fire it. So as for AC, there's no air conditioning inside the tank per se, but there is a little hack that you can use based on the tank's NBC overpressurization system. And what that is that even though the tank has no onboard air conditioning, what the tank does have is they have an air hose that you could hook up to your gas mask if in the event there was a nuclear attack. So what we end up doing is we end up taking that air hose and we just end up sticking the air hose down our uniforms to cool us off.
Wow. See, I'm glad I asked. I had no idea. Okay, so now let's go back to Vietnam. Talk about like heat, right? The Vietnam's like the sweaty land, and the one thing in the museum they had photos. It was really pretty incredible, and you know it's great also with what you did with Hal-Moore, Life in Pictures, because I think it's hard for us, other than the movies, to really understand what happened in Vietnam and the situation. I mean, it's just not like what America is. I mean, even when we were out hiking in the swamps the other day, I was kind of thinking that because I knew we were going to talk about Hal-Moore. I'm like, what would it be like to suddenly be dropped off there? And I know there's a lot of military history out in the swamplands in the States, more for World War II and I think it's World War II with the Louisiana maneuvers or World War I. I'm going to get it wrong. Yep. And so Vietnam, I'm thinking, here are these guys, you know, Bardstown, they know a little bit of humidity in Kentucky, but the swampy parts, like what if you're from, you know, New York or California, next thing you know, welcome to Vietnam and sweatiness and, you know, snakes and jungles. This is like such a new thing. When Hal-Moore was in West Point, do they prepare for that? I mean, and by the way, everyone, there's even a picture of the toilet in the museum. Because when you go there, you're like, why is there a toilet in the exhibit there? But did they prepare him for that in going to Vietnam and the soldiers at that point of what they did they know even at that point? Yes.
So even though West Point is in upstate New York, the summers there can be unbelievably brutal, and the humidity up there can get very high because you're right on the banks of the Hudson River. And there are also a lot of little lakes that are all around the training area, so that gives rise to pretty big humidity. So if you do any iteration of summer training up in and around the West Point area, you're definitely going to develop a high tolerance for humidity. Now, if we fast forward to about 1964, you know, in the days and the months before they deployed to Vietnam, many of the maneuvers that they were doing, trying to test and validate the air assault concept, happened in Georgia and also in the Carolinas, which, you know, I think short of going to Florida or going to Louisiana is probably the best way to replicate a lot of the conditions that you would run into in Southeast Asia. You know, if you do a lot of these military maneuvers in the swamplands in the Carolinas, it's definitely going to give you a feel for the same weather and the same terrain that you would run into in places like Vietnam. On a side note that's kind of related, one of the biggest training hubs here in the States for people who were going overseas to Southeast Asia was Fort Polk, Louisiana. And they even had a special name for the training area in and around Fort Polk. They called it Tigerland. And it was one of the few places in the continental U.S. where you could replicate the same conditions for jungle warfare that you would need to be ready for in a place like Southeast Asia. As a matter of fact, Colin Farrell, when he was in his heyday as an actor, he did a movie called Tigerland, and it was based on that same concept, soldiers preparing for Vietnam by training in the swamplands of Louisiana.
And Nancy and I have been out there, Fort Polk, Vernon Parish in Louisiana. Speaking of, connecting it back to the tour. In fact, we went to the Veterans Memorial Cemetery there, and it's very sobering would be the word. Really, really sobering, and it's huge. It's really huge. And a lady that took us out there, Marcy, she took us out there and very connected to the base, and she was just really. They're very passionate about what they do, and very patriotic to everyone serving at the base and where they go after and before, and even their visitor center, which is inside the courthouse over there in Leesville, is really helping the people coming in to Fort Polk to actually help them acclimate to the area and get to know what to do and see, and the families that come out as well. It's part of that is the community. I've never seen it as I don't know. They just really, really take care of everyone there, which was really, really nice to see. And going out into Kisatchie National Forest, Fort Polk is actually kind of part of that, I think, in this interesting way. And there's skaters, there's swampy places, and in fact, it's one of the top places to go for wild orchids in the country. And they do have people go out, the orchid thieves and everything. There was that Black Orchid with Nicolas Cage, if we're going to talk about movies, that kind of thing is going on in the swampy areas. So it's interesting about that. But Hal-Moore going out to Vietnam. Let's talk a little bit about that, because when he went to West Point, I'm just trying to get the numbers straight in my head. Did they know at that point that there was going to, we were going to go over to Vietnam? Did he know about Vietnam when he was in training, or was that something that came up later?
No. As a matter of fact, in the 1940s, I don't think anyone ever truly expected that we would be going to war in Southeast Asia. So Hal-Moore graduated from West Point in 1945, and at that point, World War II was coming to an end, and the big focus became the European front on the Cold War. It really wasn't until about a decade later that I think U.S. policymakers started even paying attention to Vietnam, because 1954 was when you had the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu and the effective end of the French colonialism throughout French Indochina. And being that you had the French defeat there, you also had the rise of the Viet Minh movement, which were the Vietnamese communists. And you had an ongoing struggle between the Vietnamese capitalists, those who believed in free markets and whatnot, and on the other side you had the Vietnamese communists, which were under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh. So, given that you had that polarity there in Vietnam, and being that the anti-communist policies of the Cold War are really what we're paying attention to, that's when we start to take more of a vested interest in what's happening in Southeast Asia, and this gave rise to things like the domino theory, like, hey, if one country falls to communism, then all of its neighbors are going to start to fall as well. And it certainly didn't help that China had effectively fallen to communism under Mao Zedong, and we didn't really have an ongoing relationship with China at the time. So by the time the 1960s roll around, we have an advisory mission in Vietnam. We are there strictly in a support function to help the South Vietnamese nation, as it is, stand on their own 2 feet and have the wherewithal to take care of their own defense from any infiltrations and any ongoing aggressions from the North. Now, by the time 1963, 1964 rolls around, that's when the situation in Vietnam starts going from bad to worse. And, through what I can only describe as an ongoing comedy of errors, by the middle of the 1960s, we have gone from an advisory mission to a full-on combat mission, fighting alongside the South Vietnamese forces in what ultimately ends up to be a March of Folly.
Yeah, the 60s were crazy. I just remember in high school, half the people were, we need to go there. The other half were, no, we shouldn't go there. And it was really confusing. And the press did a really, what kind of job shall I say? Hatchet job? I don't know. It was depending on whether or not the newspaper was Democratic or Republican.
Oh, that sounds like now.
Yeah, but they really, no matter what you read, you couldn't get a real sense of what was going on. There was, you shouldn't be there. We don't belong there. It's none of our business. And then it's no, we're supposed to protect democracy no matter what. And so as a kid, you're like, I don't get it. And then you ask your teachers, and they looked even more dumbfounded. So it's like nobody really seemed to take leadership and be strong. It just seemed like things just kept happening and nobody was in control. That's how when I was growing up during that, that's how I always felt. Like, I was taught by my parents to look to your parents as authorities, your teachers as authority, the military as an authority, our politicians as authorities, and that went right out the window. Went out the window because it was like a free-for-all. That's just how I grew up thinking of it, because it was a mess.
I gotta imagine like going into the military though, and going to serve your country, how it's got to feel, being the person on the ground in warfare, in this very strange predicament, and very young people, because you had you got to think you had soldiers and generals like Hal-Moore, and then you've got these young guys being sent out there that barely, how much training did they get? So Hal-Moore had to work with everybody at different levels, right, of training in a way for this war.
Right.
And don't forget, they were all smoking pot.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true.
I know, but that's what the press kept saying. I mean, it was crazy.
So, and that's part of it, right? Mike, for you is like, okay, here's the actual story. Here's a story of a man who goes out there and really, kicks some butt, I'd say. One part, obviously, in your books, we've talked about your books over the years, but on Hal-Moore, but also in the museum, they really did a big focus on the Battle of Ia Drang Valley, if I said that correctly. Ia Drang? I thought it was La Drang. See, I don't know. Ia Drang Valley. So this battle was pretty epic. You want to give everyone kind of an overview of Hal-Moore's, what he did in this?
Sure. Yeah. So let's wind the clocks back to about 1965. So this really was the start of America's combat mission in Vietnam. We had finally transitioned from an advisory mission to a full-on combat mission. And throughout the spring and summer of 1965, we had really just touch and go in engagements with some Vietnamese guerrillas. There really hadn't been a sustained land battle between American forces and North Vietnamese forces. And we really didn't have a measuring stick by which we could gauge what the North Vietnamese's capabilities really were and how they conducted themselves in combat. So we were really trying to test the waters, and we were really sending out feelers to how we would conduct ourselves in this war throughout the first part of 1965. But when you come to the late fall of 1965, that's when you really have the game changer. We knew that the North Vietnamese had been infiltrating South Vietnamese territory for quite a while at this point, but we never really had the chance to engage them in a full-on toe-to-toe battle, one that we could really, use as a measuring stick to figure out how they fought and how we could adjust our tactics accordingly. But in November of 1965, all that changed when you had Hal-Moore's air cavalry unit deploy into the Central Highlands of Vietnam and bring out full-on regiments of the North Vietnamese Army and engage them over a 3-day firefight. Mm-hmm. And even though Hal-Moore's men were outnumbered, and even though they were hamstrung by the mobility requirements of getting soldiers in and out of battle via helicopter, which would take a 30-minute round trip, they still did incredibly well throughout the battle. They won a decisive victory that killed much more enemy than what Hal-Moore's troops lost amongst their own numbers. And it was a decisive victory that they fought and won while being outnumbered almost 3-1.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And it's interesting because he went back there right after that, and that was a big deal because he was being watched. I mean, why was he going back afterwards?
Okay. Well, let's see. He went back into the Ia Drang Valley, not as an officer, but as a civilian. And this was in the early 90s. So Vietnam had been over for quite a while at this point. And relationships between the two countries, I think, were starting to heal and starting to get past the rift of the war that they had a few decades earlier. Vietnam at this point had pretty much become communist in name only. They wanted to get some favorable trade nation status, and they wanted to really become a team player on the world stage. So by the time diplomatic overtures were starting between the two countries, Hal-Moore took advantage of that and said, well, hey, now that we've put the war behind us, now that we have, started the process of healing, what say we Americans do a goodwill toward the battlefield, in the sake of, for the sake of healing and for the sake of friendship. And that's really what prompted him to want to go back to Vietnam effectively as a battlefield tourist. But even going back in that capacity took an enormous amount of red tape to get through and a lot of bureaucratic, hoops to jump through, because, it raised a red flag with the Vietnamese government that a retired American general and many of his comrades who, fought a landmark battle in the history of the Vietnam War would suddenly want to come back after nearly 20 years to, explore the battlefield. So it took a lot of vetting, and it took a lot of diplomatic back and forth between the U.S. and Vietnam before Hal-Moore finally got clearance to go. And there was more than a little bit of backdoor politicking in order to, ensure that he had safe passage into the battle space that he wanted to explore. But what surprised him, and I think what surprised a lot of his comrades when they went back to the battlefield and throughout the entire process of traveling throughout the country, was that their former enemies were greeting them sincerely as friends. There was no talk at all about who won versus who lost, or whose body count was higher, or what tactics were superior. It was just, hey, we are eager to exchange olive branches, and we are eager to build these. We want to build these bridges of friendship effectively, and say, hey, let's have a tour where we can not be enemies, but we can be friends, and we can be mutual guides, and we can bring closure not only to ourselves but bring closure to you as well. And the battlefield tour ended, I think, on a very poignant note when Hal-Moore and the commanding general, who had previously been the opposing commander during the Battle of Ia Drang, they exchanged gifts and gave each other a very resounding hug, and the Vietnamese general actually kissed him on the cheek.
Wow.
And Hal-Moore left that battle saying, he left that battlefield saying, hey, old enemies really can be friends.
Yeah.
That's amazing, when you think about him even going back and the emotion that it must have been, to go back to some place where you fought, it's got to be, that's like goosebumps, and just the memories of it all too. And then didn't he create like a nonprofit, like a scholarship fund out of that whole return visit, created like this growing thing between the two countries to help the youth.
There's been quite a few awards and scholarships that have come out of Hal-Moore's name, and out of the Association of Ia Drang Veterans.
Oh, that's awesome. And then his wife Julia, she's an awesome lady too. I mean, he knew how to marry, not just go to war. He knew how to marry. She did a lot of good things as well, from what I was reading.
Yeah, she sure did. If there was anyone in the world who was meant to be a military spouse, it was Julie Moore. She was an incredibly kind lady. She pretty much embodied grace. She not only grew up in a military family, but, she, of course, also married into one. And two of her sons ended up serving in the Army just like their father did. And, it's just amazing to hear how tirelessly she would work to ensure that the families of the soldiers under her husband's command were taken care of, and they got the emotional support that they needed. It's those intangibles, it's those metaphysical traits that, really make the military community what it is. And, without supportive spouses like Julie Moore, the enterprise would be a lot harder. I can say that.
That's awesome. That's awesome that they brought her into it too. I mean, you just think like Hal-Moore, even his house, it's a humble house. It's not this grand mansion. It's just a nice, cute little white house with an American flag flying out of it, and I felt weird taking photographs of it. I'm like, okay, it's Hal-Moore's house, so I've got to do it while I'm here. It's right around the corner from the museum, and I really encourage people, that they're interested in Hal-Moore's story, obviously get Mike's books. And we've got some news on that too. But to go to the museum when you're in Bardstown, Bardstown's in the heart of central Kentucky. The whole area is known for bourbon, horses, and history. And the museums there are exceptional. They've got a lot of Civil War history, but this one museum, obviously, having Hal-Moore being represented in his hometown in such a wonderful way, but also the museum has, so they've really captured a lot about what happened around the world in regards to wars and the different time frames. And Mike's books are right next to the world globe. And I really love that they had a globe in there, because I think it's really hard to, again, the world is round. But it's hard to understand war of what was going on without looking at a map or a globe to get that perspective of, World War. It's really hard to see how big a world war is until you look at all the countries involved,
It's actually really crazy when you think about it. Like the whole world is going to now go to war to end all wars. That was World War One. And then came World War II. After we ended the war that ended all wars, came another one. It's like, whoa, what happened?
Yep, it just keeps going on. But, so everyone check that out. One thing, though, before we talk about some updates on Hal-Moore's biography, there's a photo in there, and it's Hal-Moore in a little boat thingy, like a little canoe, and it says running the trot lines. What the heck is a trot line? What is that? Do you know what it's about, that photo?
So Hal-Moore was an avid fisherman, and that was one of his most favorite outdoor activities. So what in the world of fishing, whether it's fly fishing or whether you're just using a simple rod with your bait and tackle, so trot lines are essentially what you call the strings that will catch multiple fish.
Oh, I thought it was a war thing. I thought he was out. This just goes to show I have no clue about fishing. Yeah. But I think his being an outdoorsman helps going into battle in that kind of terrain too. That has got to have been helpful to him to understand nature and the outdoors. Because we see this now, and that's part of we have the 1 hour walk group on Facebook and getting people out to parks. People are scared of the outdoors. Have you seen that in the military where, guys and gals may come from a city environment and not be connected with nature? Have you seen that where you have to learn the outdoors? That kind of fear that some people get. Yeah. I can imagine that being kind of scary.
Yeah, it is a steep learning curve for some. There are some folks who join the military who really have never spent a lot of time outdoors. They're used to being indoors for most of their life. People who have never been camping before, people who have never really done any type of adventurous outdoor activities. And the one thing that I can say is that the learning curve is very steep. So, you even if you come into the military without really an adventurous outdoorsy background, you really get a solid feel for it. Some people take to it a lot quicker than others, and some people actually end up really enjoying it, but others, just kind of begrudgingly tolerate it. It's like, okay, well, this is just the nature of the beast. It's part of the job. So, you do it for as long as you have to, until you get the order to, come back to, to come back to civilization, essentially.
Well, if I was in the military, I'd be the person telling everybody where the snakes are. Well, I don't know, Nancy, you're the one who found the last one, and I almost stood on it, so there you go. And they're smart. They know how to camouflage themselves, and we can learn a lot about battle from nature. You really can learn.
Yeah, I just have to say, Mike, there's certain words you use, like Lisa's about to step down, and I say stop. So did she stop? Because just about where she's going to step is a snake. And now it's a tiny one, but tiny snakes are just as venomous as big ones if they are actually venomous. Did she stop? No, she did a jig.
I did a dance. Because she said stop. She didn't say snake. She couldn't say the word snake for some reason. It's like the last time with the big tarantula. Stop. The last time with the big tarantula, Nancy just goes back. And that's it. And I'm like, what? And there's this giant tarantula. And then she's wanting me to get down on the ground with the tarantula to film it.
Take a picture. Yeah.
I got pretty close down there with it. I hung out with it.
But
and I got
didn't
close
get down
with the
on
snake.
his level, which would have made such a great photo.
No. Sometimes there's a balance, err on the side of caution on things like that. But, Mike, one thing, real quick, because and I remember you covering this in an interview in your book too, and in the museum, there was a photo too about a friendship that Hal had, and it's something, you've got to remind us on this, because I remember this story being really moving, because he knew combat, right? And learned how situations were. And it was in 9/11. Didn't he save people's lives or a friend's life or something in 9/11 where they wanted everyone to go one way and he said, no, I'm going this way because this makes sense? And what am I right about this, or am I getting a different thing twirled around where he helps people out?
So the guy that you're thinking of is Rick Rescorla.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
So and he actually served under Hal-Moore at the Battle of Ia Drang.
Oh, okay.
And Rick Rescorla, he was one of the platoon leaders in Bravo Company, and it's actually Rescorla's picture, the soldier who's holding the rifle and the bayonet. It's his picture that's on the cover of the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young. So Rick, he was one of the top soldiers in the battalion, and kind of an interesting story behind Rick himself. He actually grew up in the UK in World War II. And as a young boy, he would see the American paratroopers who were stationed in his hometown getting ready for the invasion of Europe. So that was what inspired him ultimately to come to the U.S. and become a paratrooper himself. So he did that and ended up getting his American citizenship, served in Vietnam under Hal-Moore, stayed active duty for a few years, then got out, but stayed in the Army Reserve until he was a colonel. And in his civilian career, he was an attorney. And throughout the 90s, he did a variety of corporate jobs, and then took a job with one of the companies that was in the World Trade Center. And on 9/11, he was helping to ferry people out of the building, and he was still trying to save some folks who were in Tower 2 when it ultimately collapsed.
Wow. It's amazing how everything turns around, right? Oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So your very first biography of Hal-Moore is getting re-released this year, right? And this is Hal-Moore, A Soldier Once and Always. And that's being re-released
Correct.
with a new cover, and you have an addition to the book, right?
Yes, I sure do. So the first edition of the book came out in 2013 when Hal-Moore was still with us. And then Hal-Moore tragically passed away in 2017. And what this new re-released version of the book is going to include is a revised cover that has some new cover art to it, and also a section of the book that talks about the last years of his life, and also touches on the very touching funeral and memorial service that he had, which was very much befitting a hero of his stature. It was just an incredible experience for those that were there. For those who had a front seat to it, it was an experience that we will not soon forget.
Wow. Well, thank you so much again, as always, being back on the show. We're excited for the revised or the new edition of Hal-Moore, A Soldier Once and Always. Of course, you can get the book now through Amazon or go right to MikeGuardia.com. Also, Hal-Moore on Leadership and Hal-Moore, A Life in Pictures. Just go to MikeGuardia.com and check out his whole library that he has. Before you go to, of course, we're going to play music for you, Mike. But what's next? Because you always have a book in the works. There's always something next. There's always next.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you again for having me on the show and for what is on the horizon. As a matter of fact, I just finished the first draft to a book called Days of Fury, and that tells the story of the Battle of 73 Easting from the perspective of Ghost Troop, which was one of the frontline units that fought in that battle. So I just finished the first draft of that book, and this week I will be sending it out to the troopers whom I interviewed. They're going to do a final QA/QC over the book before I send it to the printer. And then after that, I have a book called Danger Forward, and that is a biography on Paul Gorman. He was the hero of the Battle of Bong Train and the architect of the Pentagon Papers.
Wow.
And then after that is another book called Skybreak, which is about the 58th Fighter Squadron in Desert Storm. They were the top MiG-killing aces of that conflict.
Wow.
And then I have a few other projects in the hopper. I'll give you a preview for what's on tap for the spring of 2021, and the name of that project is called A Dawn Like Thunder, and that is a collection of true stories from the Iran-Iraq air war, where you had Iraqi MiGs taking on Iranian F-14s in the skies over Persia.
Wow. And that's spring 2022, right? Or this year, 2021?
22. Yeah.
Okay, 20. I know. I still feel like we're in 2020. Even talking about going to Hal-Moore's museum. Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, I'm going like 2000. When I thought it was last year, and it was last year in my mind, but this last year just went by. It felt slow for a lot, people not being able to get out and about, but for us, like it's been this whirlwind of. And how you keep listing all these new book projects that you have and that you do. I mean, it's like you have all these projects and they all come to fruition. And it sounds like Nancy and I traveling, and then we're going here, and then we're going here. And it may change, but we're going here. But hopefully, Mike, that we'll see you in Minnesota sometime because
that'd be cool.
We're going to be crisscrossing the country. And I was looking at the map there going, well, that looks like a short detour to Mike. It could be 8 hours. That's a short detour. But
it is.
Yeah, we're going from, let's see, if we're going from California to Wisconsin, like that can't, and then we have to go back that way to Oregon. I'm sure somewhere along the way we can go to Minnesota and hopefully see you. And I would like to meet you.
Dude, I don't know what kind of map you have.
I don't know, but there's a lot of detours. But I think we should meet you at a tank so you can give us a tour of a tank. I want to see a tank.
Oh, that'd be cool.
On the inside, because you see them on the outside and you just you can't even fathom it. It's like, wow, people get in there and do that. So, but anyway, hopefully we can make that happen. Again, keep up with Mike at MikeGuardia.com. Our Military Monday shows are every first Monday. Keep up with our shows at BigBlendRadio.com, and for our magazines, BigBlendMagazines.com. And we're going to close the show with I think was the best fitting song is Colors of the USA, and it's by Doreen Taylor. I know we've played it on Hal-Moore segments before, but it just feels like the right song. And you can keep up with Doreen at DoreenTaylorMusic.com. But here it is, Colors of the USA. Thank you so much, Military Mike.
Thanks,
we'll
Mike.
chat again soon.
Ladies, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you.
Take care.
From